piano sat in the middle of the open hall, shining under soft white lights. People walked past it all day, some slowing down for a second, some taking quick photos, but most barely noticed it anymore. It had become part of the place like the walls or the floor, clean, polished, untouched. A sign nearby politely asked people not to play without permission. A staff member stood at a distance, watching casually, already bored of guarding something that almost no one asked to use. Late in the afternoon, when the crowd began to thin, a man entered the hall from the far door. He did not rush. His steps were slow and careful, like someone who was tired but still trying to stand tall. His clothes were old and faded, not torn, just worn by time. His shoes had lost their shine long ago. At first, no one paid attention to him. People rarely did. As he walked forward, his eyes caught sight of the piano. The moment felt sudden, like something pulling him from the inside. His steps slowed even more. He stopped walking altogether and simply stood there, staring. The noise of the hall continued around him, but his face softened, and his eyes filled with a quiet focus. It was not the look of curiosity. It was recognition. He did not move closer right away. Instead, he stayed where he was, watching from a distance. His hands twitched slightly at his sides, as if they remembered something his mind had not yet said out loud. A faint smile appeared and disappeared just as quickly. He took a deep breath, then another, steadying himself. Minutes passed. People came and went. A group laughed loudly as they walked past him. A child ran ahead of their parents. None of it seemed to reach him. His attention stayed locked on the piano. Finally, he took a few steps forward. Then a few more. Each step felt heavy, as if he were crossing an invisible line. When he reached the piano, he stopped again. He did not touch it. He did not even lift his hand. He just stood there, close enough to see the reflection of his face in the polished surface. He swallowed and looked around, searching for someone in charge. His eyes met the staff members. The staff member straightened slightly, already guessing what was coming. The man spoke softly, his voice rough but polite. He asked if he could touch the piano. Not play it. Just touch it. The request caught the staff member off guard. People usually asked to take photos or leaned against it without permission. No one ever asked just to touch it. The staff member hesitated and glanced at the sign. Rules were rules. Before an answer came, a few nearby people slowed down. They sensed something was happening. The man waited, hands clasped together now, as if holding on to patience. The staff member said no, not unkindly but firmly. The piano was expensive. It was meant for special events only. The answer was final. The man nodded. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply said he understood. But he did not move away. He stood there silent, his eyes lowered to the keys, his lips pressed together, holding back words that wanted to come out. After a moment, he spoke again, this time with a small shake in his voice. He said he would be careful. He said he had not touched a piano in many years. The staff member shifted uncomfortably. People were now openly watching. Some judged quietly. Some felt curious. Others felt nothing at all. Again, the answer was no. The man closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, there was disappointment there, deep and honest. He took a step back. His shoulders dropped, as if carrying something heavy that had just grown heavier. As he turned slightly away, his hand brushed the air above the keys, stopping just short of touching them. He pulled his hand back quickly, almost like a child afraid of being scolded. He whispered an apology, though no one had accused him of anything. Then he stepped back fully. People expected him to leave. Some even waited for it, already losing interest. But instead, he stayed nearby, standing against a pillar a short distance away. He watched the piano again from farther this time. The hall noise slowly filled the space around him once more. His mind wandered backward, far from the hall, far from the lights and noise. Memories stirred. Small rooms, quiet nights, fingers moving across keys worn smooth by years of practice. Music that once filled his life when words were not enough. Those days felt like another lifetime, Life had not been gentle. Work had replaced passion. Survival had replaced dreams. One choice led to another, and slowly the piano faded from reach. Until now, he looked down at his hands. They were rougher than they used to be, older, but they were still his hands. A woman walking past noticed him staring. She followed his gaze to the piano, then back to his face. There was something there she couldn't name. Not sadness alone. Hope, maybe, or longing. The man straightened his back. He wiped his palms against his pants, even though he knew he wouldn't be playing. Old habits stayed. He took one last look at the piano, then turned as if ready to walk away for good. But his feet didn't move right away. He lingered, standing between leaving and staying. Behind him, a quiet conversation began among a few onlookers. Questions without answers. Who was he? Why did he care so much? The man heard none of it. He was already somewhere else in his mind, standing at the edge of something unfinished. And though he did not know it yet, this was only the beginning. After a few minutes of standing quietly, the man tried again. His voice was low, almost shy this time. He asked if he could just press one key. Just one note. The staff member looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly, unsure whether to laugh or stay firm. People passing by slowed down again. The small crowd that had begun to gather watched silently. No, the staff member said firmly. The rules are the rules. I cannot let anyone play. The man nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the piano. He did not argue. He did not try to push the staff member or plead in a way that seemed demanding. Instead, he lowered his head and whispered, "I understand," but he didn't move. He simply stayed there, quiet, looking at the instrument with a mixture of longing and restraint. It was clear he wanted something beyond permission. He wanted connection. He wanted a brief return to something that had been missing for years. The staff member shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the small gathering crowd. There were whispers now. Some people were curious. Some were suspicious. A few frowned. They wondered why a stranger would care so much about a piano. It was just an instrument, they thought. But his presence made it feel like so much more. "Please," the man said softly. "Just one moment. I won't break it. I promise." The staff member hesitated, torn between rules and something else. Something he could not name. There was a tension in the air that made the hall feel quieter, though the sound of footsteps and distant conversations continued. The man waited patiently, though his eyes showed fatigue, and his hands twitched slightly at his sides. People around began to murmur among themselves. "Why doesn't he just leave?" one whispered. "He looks harmless," said another. "But the rules are strict," someone else argued. The man's attention never wavered from the piano. He studied the keys as if trying to remember something lost long ago. His lips moved slightly, almost as if he were reciting a memory. Some people in the crowd noticed it and felt a strange pull, though they could not say why. A mother held her child closer, the child pointing at the man and the piano. She smiled softly, saying, "He must really love music." The man's eyes flicked toward the child for a moment. A gentle smile appeared and disappeared quickly. Then he returned his gaze to the piano, taking a deep breath. The kind of breath that carries hope and fear together. "I haven't played in years," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I used to play all the time. I never thought I'd see one again." The staff member's hand rested on the edge of the piano, conflicted. He had seen many people, many situations, but something about the man made him pause. He could not explain why. There was sincerity in the man's eyes that did not beg, demand, or threaten. It simply existed. Time seemed to slow. The hall around them faded slightly as if everything else became background noise. The man's voice was steady now, softer but filled with quiet emotion. "I just want a moment. One brief moment. To remember what it feels like." The staff member said nothing. He looked at the crowd. Some faces showed curiosity, some judgment, some empathy. The decision weighed heavily. Rules were one thing, but seeing the man's hands, roughened by life yet gentle as they hung by his side, made it difficult to deny the request entirely. The man's posture shifted slightly. He moved one step closer to the piano, careful not to touch it. The movement was small, but the tension around him seemed to grow. People leaned in, feeling the anticipation like a quiet storm. The man's hands hovered just above the keys. He did not press them yet. He simply reached as if to remember their shape. Someone in the crowd murmured, "It's like he's remembering a lifetime in that one-hand movement." Another person whispered, "I've never seen someone so careful, so gentle." The staff member finally spoke, voice softening, though he still said no. "I cannot let you play." The man nodded. Again, he did not argue. His shoulders slumped slightly, but he did not leave. Instead, he stepped back a pace, folding his hands in front of him. His eyes lingered on the keys, full of memories, full of quiet yearning. For a moment, it seemed like he might turn and walk away, but then his hand brushed the air near the piano again. Not touching it, just brushing the space above. The crowd shifted. A few people whispered to one another. "He's not doing anything wrong," someone said quietly. "He just wants to remember." The man spoke again, softer now. "I will not hurt it. I only want to feel it one last time. Please." A long silence followed. The staff member's eyes flicked between the man and the keys. He glanced at the small crowd, unsure what they expected him to do. Rules said no. But something in the man's voice, the way he carried himself, the honesty in his eyes, made it almost impossible to say no again. The man's breathing was steady now, though there was tension in his jaw and hands. He was prepared for rejection but hoped for mercy. The hall seemed to hold its breath alongside him. Time slowed further, stretching seconds into what felt like minutes. Finally, the staff member made a motion for the man to wait. He stepped closer, whispering something the crowd could not hear. The man nodded. He did not smile yet. His focus was complete, locked on the piano, as if nothing else existed in the hall. Some children in the crowd tugged at their parents' sleeves. "Why is he sad?" one asked quietly. The parents did not answer immediately. They simply watched. There was a sense that this was more than a request. This was something deeply human, a moment of quiet longing, respect, and courage all wrapped in one. The man's hands shifted again, hovering above the keys. He did not press them. He only imagined the sound, the feel, the movement. Every little motion was filled with a lifetime of memories. Practice, mistakes, joy, sorrow, passion, and patience. His eyes shone with the reflection of the polished surface, not in pride, but in recognition of something he had lost and now almost had again. People in the crowd whispered quietly, "It's like he belongs here." Another said, "I've never seen anyone care this much." The man lowered his head slightly, whispering something inaudible. His lips moved, forming words only he could hear. Then slowly he looked up again. His fingers twitched above the keys, unsure, gentle, respectful. The staff member looked at him again. He could see the patience, the restraint, the longing. He knew rules were important, but sometimes there were moments that rules could not measure. He looked at the piano and back at the man. His hand shifted toward the edge, then hesitated. The man stayed quiet, giving no demand, no argument, only hope and patience. His posture was humble, his presence respectful. For a moment, it seemed the hall itself waited, holding its breath with everyone inside. And though the answer had been no twice, the moment was growing heavy with the possibility of change. Everyone who had stopped to watch sensed that something might happen soon, something they would not forget. The man did not know if he would ever play again, if he would ever feel the keys under his fingers. But he stood there, holding on to hope, holding on to respect, holding on to the fragile edge between rejection and permission. It was a quiet struggle, a human moment, and it drew the attention of everyone in the hall. Even those who had thought nothing of him before now felt the weight of his presence and the quiet, heartfelt story he carried without speaking a word. The staff member finally made a small motion, barely noticeable. He gestured slightly, a question in his eyes. The man's face changed, just a little, a flicker of cautious anticipation. He did not move too fast. He did not rush. He waited, still gentle, still patient, still human. The hall continued its rhythm around them, unaware of the quiet miracle about to unfold. But for the man, for the staff member, and for the people who watched, time had slowed, leaving only the piano, the longing, and the fragile hope of something extraordinary. The hall seemed to pause as the staff member glanced once more at the man. Something in his eyes had shifted, a silent question that asked if permission could be allowed for just a brief moment. The man's hands stayed where they were, hovering over the keys, ready but cautious. His entire body radiated a mixture of hope and restraint. A few people in the small crowd whispered among themselves, noticing the change. "Do you think he'll be allowed?" one asked quietly. Another replied, "It feels like he's been waiting for this all his life." The man did not move. He waited patiently, not pressing forward or showing impatience. His presence was calm, but beneath the surface, his heart raced. He remembered long nights in small rooms, quiet and empty except for the piano, when music was all he had. Those memories pushed him forward now, softly, gently, like a tide rising in a hidden cove. Finally, the staff member spoke, his voice quiet but decisive. "Okay," he said. "One moment, just a moment, but be careful. I'm watching." The man's face softened immediately, relief washing over him. He did not rush forward, nor did he smile too broadly. He simply nodded, a small, almost invisible gesture of gratitude. Every eye in the hall seemed to focus on him now, the anticipation building like a quiet storm. He took a slow step closer, feeling the space between himself and the piano. It was not a stride. It was careful, measured, respectful. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly but controlled. He pressed down lightly, just one key, and the soft sound filled the hall. The note was pure, almost fragile, yet it carried with it the weight of memory and longing. The crowd grew still. The chatter and footsteps faded into silence as people instinctively leaned in, listening to the single note. It was enough to make them feel something they could not explain. Some felt a shiver run down their spine. Others blinked rapidly, trying to take it all in. He pressed another key, then another, slowly, one by one, building a simple melody. It was not complex, not showy, but it was honest and filled with emotion. The music moved gently through the hall, wrapping around the listeners like a soft, invisible blanket. People stopped in their tracks. Phones were lifted cautiously, capturing the moment. Yet no one dared interrupt. The man's connection with the piano was too powerful, too real. His hands glided across the keys with ease and familiarity. Each touch, each note, was confident yet delicate, revealing years of practice, dedication, and love for the instrument. Even the staff member, who had been strict and firm moments before, felt a lump in his throat. He could not look away, for the music was no longer just sound. It was a story unfolding without words. The man's eyes closed as he played. Memories flooded back. Quiet nights, tiny rooms, the echo of his own heartbeat mingling with the piano's voice. He could feel the life he had almost forgotten returning, if only for these few precious moments. His fingers moved naturally, dancing across the keys as if they had never been apart from them. People whispered softly, unable to hold their emotions in check. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others simply stared, mouths slightly open in amazement. A child clutched a parent's hand, sensing something extraordinary without understanding why. The hall had transformed from a busy public space into a place of reverence, where time seemed to stand still. As he continued, the melody became richer, weaving in small flourishes and subtle changes. The man did not notice the crowd or their reactions. He was lost entirely in the music, lost in the memory of who he had once been, and in the moment of being fully present again. The piano, the keys, the sound, they were no longer just objects. They were companions, old friends who had waited patiently for his return. The staff member finally let out a quiet breath, realizing that the music was more than just a demonstration of skill. It was an expression of the man's soul, a story that could not be told in words alone. Even those who had been skeptical, impatient, or dismissive before felt a change within themselves. The melody spoke to something deep, something universal. Minutes passed. The man continued to play, building layers of feeling into the music. Each note carried a memory. Each pause held a reflection. The hall was no longer just a hall. It was a vessel for emotion, a temporary sanctuary. People's hearts beat in time with the rhythm, though they did not notice consciously. Some were moved to tears, others felt a gentle warmth spread through them, an unspoken connection to the music and the person who played it. Eventually, he slowed, letting the last few notes linger in the air. The sound hung softly, like a delicate mist, before fading completely. He opened his eyes slowly, a quiet smile touching his lips. It was not a triumphant smile, not proud or boastful. It was a smile of peace, of fulfillment, of someone who had reclaimed a piece of themselves for even a fleeting moment. The hall remained silent for a heartbeat. Then a ripple of applause began. It started small, hesitant, and then grew. Some clapped softly, some more enthusiastically, but everyone participated in their own way. The man looked up at the crowd, but his gaze quickly returned to the piano. Gratitude and humility shone in his eyes. A few people approached, murmuring questions and compliments. They wanted to know his story, how he had learned to play, why he cared so much. He answered softly, briefly, revealing just enough to let them feel the depth of his experience without taking away the magic of the moment. He spoke of lost years, of hardship, of love for music that had never left him. The staff member stepped back, no longer tense. He realized that the decision to allow this brief touch of the piano had been more than right. It had been necessary. The man had reminded everyone present that music could heal, could connect, and could reveal humanity in ways rules and signs never could. The man finished his brief session, gently lifting his hands from the keys. He did not rush away, nor did he linger too long. He simply stood, breathing quietly, letting the music settle in the hearts of those who had heard it. Then, with a nod of thanks, he stepped back, blending once more into the hall, a quiet figure carrying something invisible but profound. The crowd remained still for a moment, savoring the memory of what had just happened. Conversations began again slowly, but people spoke differently now. There was respect, awe, and a shared understanding that they had witnessed something rare, something human and beautiful. Some looked around, realizing they had been in the presence of someone who reminded them of the power of passion, patience, and quiet courage. The man's moment with the piano, brief though it was, had changed the space, the people, and perhaps even himself. He had reclaimed a small but precious part of his life, a reminder that even in the hardest of times, hope, skill, and beauty could still exist. And as he walked away, people carried the echo of his music with them, a gentle reminder of wonder, resilience, and the magic that could happen when someone followed the heart, quietly, respectfully, and bravely. As the man's fingers began to move more confidently across the piano, a quiet spell fell over the hall. The earlier noise of footsteps, chatter, and distant announcements faded into the background. People leaned in, watching intently, as the music began to grow beyond simple notes. Each key he touched carried emotion, not just sound, and it reached the hearts of everyone who heard it. At first, he played softly, gently, almost as if he were testing the air around him. The melody was slow, careful, each note deliberate. But with every movement of his hands, the music became richer. It flowed naturally, almost effortlessly, as if the piano itself recognized his touch and responded with warmth. His eyes remained closed for most of the performance. He did not look at the audience. He did not look at the staff member who had allowed him this brief moment. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere in the past, reliving years of memories, joys, and hardships through each key he pressed. It was a private conversation with the piano, a silent story told through music alone. People watching began to feel it too. A woman in the back pressed her hand to her chest, trying to contain the emotion swelling inside her. An older man wiped his eyes quickly, as if embarrassed to cry in public, but unable to stop himself. Even teenagers, usually restless and uninterested, froze in place, captivated by the sound. The melody shifted subtly, carrying both sadness and hope. There was a softness in the lower notes, a gentle reminder of loss, and a brightness in the higher ones, signaling resilience and triumph. It was not fast, not flashy, not intended to impress. It was human, real, and it spoke directly to anyone willing to listen. The man's hands moved gracefully across the keys, fingers dancing, pressing, releasing. There was no rush, only flow. His posture was relaxed but focused, every movement precise yet natural. It was clear to anyone watching that this was not a casual display of skill. It was years of practice, dedication, and love channeled into every sound. A child near the front leaned on a parent's leg, eyes wide. "Why does it sound so sad but happy at the same time?" the child whispered. The parent did not answer immediately, simply holding the child closer, feeling the complexity of the emotion without needing words. The staff member stood to the side, arms crossed but eyes softened. He had watched many people approach the piano, some confident, some hesitant. None had moved him like this. The music was no longer just playing. It was transforming the space, affecting everyone present. He realized that rules had their place, but moments like this were rare and precious, and sometimes they needed to be made possible. The melody continued to grow. The man's hands moved more freely now, weaving small improvisations into the tune. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it made the music feel alive. Every pause, every soft note, seemed intentional, as if the piano itself were breathing alongside him. People felt the rhythm in their own hearts, their own breath. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, feeling memories, emotions, or thoughts they had not recognized until that moment. He glanced up briefly at the keys, but only to find his place. Otherwise, his eyes remained closed. He did not need to see the crowd. He did not need to hear the whispers. The music came from somewhere deep within him, a place untouched by doubt or fear. It was a place that had waited, patient and silent, for years until now. The crowd began to respond in subtle ways. Small smiles appeared, hands clenched softly in awe, some feet tapping quietly to the rhythm. It was as though the music was not just being played, but shared. Each note invited the listeners into the story, a story of patience, longing, and quiet strength. As the performance continued, the man's confidence grew. The melody became more intricate, moving between soft, reflective passages and brighter, uplifting phrases. It was as though he was telling a story without words, letting the music carry every nuance. People felt it deeply, and some felt tears well up in their eyes. The hall seemed to hold its breath, respecting the moment, letting the music speak louder than any voice could. The man's hands moved with elegance, striking chords that resonated not just in the hall, but in the hearts of everyone present. There were moments of stillness, where the sound hung delicately, almost trembling, and moments of gentle crescendos that made the air vibrate with life. Every person in the hall felt a connection, even if they had never played a piano or thought much about music before. The emotion was universal. The staff member's stance softened further. He realized that allowing this brief moment had been more than a decision. It had been a gift. The music had broken through walls of skepticism, doubt, and routine. It reminded everyone present that beauty and humanity could be found in unexpected places, and sometimes, in the simplest gestures of permission. As the music moved toward its end, the man's hands slowed, pressing the keys lightly, allowing the sound to linger. The final notes hung in the air, delicate and clear, like a whisper of wind through an open window. People held their breath for a heartbeat, reluctant to let the moment end, reluctant to leave the spell that had been cast. Then, slowly, he lifted his hands from the piano. The silence that followed was profound. It was not empty. It was full of the emotion and connection that had just been shared. People blinked, some in awe, some wiping tears from their eyes. The hall had changed, if only for a few minutes. The energy of the music, the feeling of witnessing something true and real, lingered in the air. The crowd began to clap softly, then more earnestly, some cheering quietly, but all with respect and appreciation. The applause was not for showmanship, not for skill alone, but for the honesty, vulnerability, and humanity that the man had shared. He nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement, and then stood back, letting the moment settle naturally. People approached him slowly, not rushing, asking questions in hushed tones. Some wanted to know how long he had played, others what had inspired him. He answered softly, sharing a few details, just enough to let them understand that this was more than a performance. It was a reconnection, a reclaiming of something that had been lost, and now briefly found again. The staff member smiled quietly, satisfied that the moment had been shared respectfully. He realized that the piano had not only given the man a chance to remember, but it had given everyone present a reminder of the power of patience, courage, and the quiet beauty of human expression. The man finally stepped away from the piano, not hurriedly, not dramatically, but with a calm grace. He looked back once, his eyes meeting the crowd for a brief second. There was gratitude there, humility, and a subtle pride in having shared something so intimate. Then he turned, blending quietly into the hall, leaving behind a space forever touched by the music and the story it carried. People remained in place for a moment longer, feeling the weight of what they had witnessed. Some whispered to one another, sharing feelings they could not easily put into words. Others simply sat or stood quietly, allowing the emotion of the music to settle inside them. The experience had left them changed, even if only slightly, and that was enough. The hall slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the memory of the music, of the man's hands, of the delicate story told without words, lingered in the hearts of those who had listened. It was a reminder that sometimes, the simplest, quietest gestures could carry the greatest power, and that true beauty could emerge from patience, humility, and the courage to touch something with care and respect. When the man finally stepped away from the piano, the hall felt different. The air seemed lighter, though it still carried the echoes of his music. People remained still for a few moments, savoring what had just happened. The performance had ended, but the feeling lingered, like a soft glow that would not fade quickly. Some in the crowd approached slowly, hesitant but curious. They asked him questions, gentle and careful, as if not wanting to disturb the fragile moment. "How long have you been playing?" one asked. "I used to," he replied quietly. "A long time ago. Life took me elsewhere, but the music stayed with me." He spoke softly, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself. Yet everyone listened, drawn to the sincerity in his voice. He explained, briefly, that the piano had always been a part of him, something that reminded him of quiet nights, small victories, and the joy of creating something beautiful. He did not boast, did not try to impress. He only shared a small piece of his life, and that was enough. The staff member approached, offering a smile. "You have a gift," he said quietly. "Thank you for sharing it." The man nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. It was not a smile of pride, but of understanding, of recognition. He had been given a chance to reconnect with something lost, and he had done it with respect and patience. That moment alone was priceless. People lingered, whispering to one another. They shared their impressions, the emotions the music had stirred, the way it had filled a public space with something private and intimate. Some felt tears they hadn't expected. Others felt a strange sense of hope and inspiration. It was as if the music had opened a door in their hearts, one they didn't even know was closed. A young woman approached him, holding a small notebook. "May I ask your name?" she said softly. "I want to remember this. Write about it." He shook his head gently. "It doesn't matter," he said. "It's not about me. It's about the music, the moment. That's what matters." The crowd began to thin slowly, but the atmosphere remained charged with quiet awe. People walked away, some in thoughtful silence, others quietly discussing what they had just witnessed. The music had done more than fill a room. It had touched lives, connected strangers, and reminded everyone that beauty and talent can exist even in the most unexpected places. The man lingered a moment longer, glancing at the piano one last time. His hands were still slightly lifted, fingers curling as if wanting to touch the keys again, but he did not. He took a deep breath and turned toward the exit. His steps were slow, measured, and calm. There was no rush, no sense of leaving something incomplete. He had experienced what he needed, and now it was time to move on. Outside the hall, the late afternoon sunlight warmed his face. He paused, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a goal quietly achieved. No one had clapped for him in the streets, no one had shouted praise, yet he felt the recognition in a deeper way. It was not public acclaim he had sought. It was the private knowledge that he had connected with something essential to who he was. As he walked, he noticed people looking after him with quiet respect. Some offered small nods, subtle gestures of appreciation. Others whispered softly to one another, recounting the performance, the feeling, the unusual and gentle courage it had taken to ask to touch the piano and then play with such care and depth. He remembered the long years away from music. Life had been demanding, unkind, and distracting. Work, responsibilities, and struggles had pushed the piano to the background. Yet he had never stopped thinking about it, never stopped imagining the feel of the keys under his fingers. That thought had carried him forward, had reminded him that even in difficult times, some part of him remained untouched, waiting, patient. He reached a small park nearby and paused, sitting on a bench. Children played, their laughter carried on the wind, and a gentle breeze brushed past him. He closed his eyes, replaying the music in his mind, feeling the warmth of the piano's wood beneath his fingers, remembering the resonance of each note. That memory now existed both in him and in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. A passerby recognized him from the hall and offered a small smile. "That was beautiful," they said quietly. "You reminded us of something we had forgotten." The man nodded, accepting the words, but did not linger. He knew the moment was shared and complete. The impact was not about him alone. It belonged to everyone who had heard the music, who had felt its presence, who had been reminded of beauty, patience, and quiet courage. As evening fell, the city lights began to glow softly, reflecting off the windows and streets. The man walked slowly, blending into the crowd, carrying with him a sense of fulfillment that could not be measured. He had asked, been denied, persisted, and finally, through quiet courage and respect, created something extraordinary. It had been brief, but it had been enough. He thought about the people in the hall, about the staff member, about the strangers who had witnessed the music. He hoped they would remember it not just for the skill or melody, but for the emotion, the honesty, and the human connection that had carried through each note. Music had a power that words often could not match, and today it had reminded him, and everyone present, that small acts of courage and sincerity could ripple far beyond the moment itself. The man continued walking, his steps slow and measured, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. The piano would remain there, waiting for the next person who might touch it, but he carried something more valuable now. The memory of reconnection, of courage, of a moment shared between a man and a piano, between a soul and the music it had never truly lost. He disappeared into the crowd, unseen, yet leaving a quiet mark on those who had seen him, heard him, and felt the music in ways they would not forget. It was a true story of patience, humility, and the wonder that can emerge when someone is given a chance to follow their heart, even just for a moment. And though the hall would return to its normal rhythm, the memory of that music, of that human connection, would linger, reminding everyone that sometimes, the smallest requests and the quietest courage can create the purest wonder.